welcome to this tutorial video for Prog 1210 Rapid Application Development. This video is going to focus on creating an insert form so that we can add new records to our database table. So we're going to begin by creating the input fields necessary to capture information from the user. We're going to need text boxes for first name, last name, and birth date, and we're going to create drop downs for practice day and instrument. So I'm going to open my toolbox. We'll add in a few text boxes, a few labels beside them so that we can label each text box so the user knows what to enter where. So I created my label here, and I'm just going to give it the text first name. And next to that, a text box. And I'm going to give this text box the ID value of txt add first. The reason why I'm using the word add is because later we will want to distinguish it from the text box that allows us to edit the first name. So txt add first for the text box that allows us to add a first name. Now I'm just going to skip the video ahead while I create the other text boxes. So here's our three text boxes: txt add first, txt add last, and txt add birth for the birth date. Now I'm going to create two drop-downs, one for practice day and one for instrument. So I'm going to start by dragging and dropping a drop-down control next to practice day. Now notice the options here: choose data source and edit items. Choose data source is if we want to fill our drop-down with information from an entity or an object or some other data source. Edit items is for when we want to hard code the objects. And for practice days, because we know that there will only ever be 7 days and we want there to be exactly 7, it's easier for us at this point just to edit the items and type in the 7 days, each one having a different value. So I'm going to click on that edit items option, click add to add 7 list items, and just modify them one by one so that they list the 7 days of the week. So select the list item, click next to its text property, and type in the day of the week. You'll notice the value gets filled in automatically when you press enter after typing the text. So I'm just going to fill in the rest of these. I skipped past a few there, and here is the last one, Saturday. So I click OK, and that allows us to fill in the options for practice day. I'm just going to edit the ID there so that it gives us a decent ID value. I'm choosing DDL for drop-down list, add, so we know that we're in the insert form, and practice. Now for the instrument one, this is not a fixed list, it's a list that's coming from our instrument table in the database. Now we already have a data source that we can use to fill this because we created it in the previous video when we made a drop-down for editing instruments. So we can use this EDS instrument list data source as the data source for our instrument drop-down here too. Now remember that this pulls data from the instrument object, not from the musician table. Now I'm going to choose my data source. Make sure to select the instrument list data source. We want to display the instrument name to the users, but use the instrument ID, that integer foreign key value, for the value of the drop-down list. And if you find your drop-down lists are empty, you can always click on this refresh schema link in the bottom left here. So we'll click OK. Now the last two things that we need before our insert form is complete are an insert button, so that we can click it to insert the new musicians. And I'm going to also put a little label there for user feedback, so we can fill that feedback with error messages if there's a problem with our insert, or with success messages when our musician is inserted successfully. So I'll create the button first, just drag and drop it here. I'm going to have the button say add musician. And we'll give the button a decent name too, btn add. And I'll just make some space underneath for our feedback label. Now I'm going to have it start out as being blank, so I'll remove the text and we'll give it the ID of LBL feedback. So we need a click event for this button. In order to create it, I'm just going to double click on the Add Musician button, and you can see that it gives us our btn add click function. You'll also notice that in our code, I have declared an object of type band database entities. So band database entities is the class that represents all of our entity framework classes, the object model and everything. So you can see it's named DB. We name it that to remind us that it references our database object. So the first thing we're going to do here is capture the user's input. Then we're going to use that input to create a new musician object. And once that musician object is created, we're going to add it to the list of musicians. Then we'll flush our changes both back to the database and also forward to the user interface. So we'll start by capturing the value from the first name text box. We'll create a variable to hold it. We'll grab our txt add first and get its text property. So that's the text that the user entered into the first name text box. And I'm going to create similar properties for the other boxes. So I skip ahead a bit there. You'll see we've encountered a problem with our data type. Because the birth date is stored in the database and in the musician object as a date time, we'll have to do a little data type conversion here. So we'll save this as a date time and convert the value from the text box to a date time object. Now ideally we'd want to have some validation in there, both on the client side and back here, to make sure that our conversion is going to work properly. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to skip the validation step. So the last two things we've got are the practice day, and we can get that from our drop-down, DbL add practice. Now because of the drop-down, we don't want the text, we want the selected value. And the last thing we want is the instrument ID. Now the instrument ID is an integer. I'm going to create an integer for the instrument ID, and we will get that from the drop-down of the instruments. But because this thing is a string, we'll need to convert it to an integer. Like so. So now that we have all of our values, we can create our new musician object. So we'll declare and instantiate it. And now we'll set its properties. So the new musician object has all these properties that are mapped to the properties in the database. So we'll set these to be equal to the user's inputted values. And I'll just skip ahead a little bit. So now I've mapped all of these new user values into our new musician object. The next thing we'll do is add our new musician to the database. So we're going to take our band database entities object, DB, and go into its collection of musicians. You can see it has this DbSet, or collection of musician objects, one for each musician in the table. So we're going to go into that collection and use an add function to add the new musician entity. So we're going to add the new musician that we've created. Now we can update our changes on the database side by calling db.savechanges function, and update how it looks to the user on the web form by re-data binding our grid view. So that just tells the grid view to go back to the data source and refresh the data that's populating the grid view. Last but not least, we'll use our little feedback label to tell the user that their insert was successful. So if we execute this now, we should have a working insert form. try to insert a new musician here. Just put in some data for her. We'll click on Add. And you can see we get our Insert Successful message, and we have our new musician in the list. The next video in this series will show you how to do an insert in much the same way, except instead of adding to the musician collection, we're going to use an insert stored procedure.